My diamond earring fell onto the marble floor and spun under the chandelier's light just seconds after my mother's hand struck my face. It happened when I refused to hand over the keys to my $2 million penthouse right there in the middle of the reception speech, at my younger sister's wedding, and it was all being live streamed. My mother's voice cracked through the microphone, sharp and harsh. "Today is your sister's big day, Samantha. Don't ruin it." I did not lift my hand to my cheek. I did not cry. I only looked at the earring glittering on the floor, knowing that this moment would not end in that ballroom. It would shake my entire family and beyond. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The silence that followed was heavier than the marble beneath my heels. 200 guests stared at me, their smiles frozen like porcelain masks. The band stopped mid-note. A champagne flute trembled in the hands of one of Chloe's bridesmaids, the bubbles inside bursting like tiny sparks in the stillness. It was a silence that pressed against my ribs and made each heartbeat sound like a drum. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush to gather the earring. I let it lie there, spinning slower and slower, until it settled under the cruel glare of the chandelier. That diamond had been my gift to myself after closing the Singapore deal, a reminder that I didn't need anyone's approval to shine. And now it lay on the floor as if it belonged to them, a symbol of how they always tried to strip away what I had built. Phones hovered above tables. Guests thought they were discreet, but I could see the glow of red recording lights blinking like tiny warnings in the crowd. Across the ballroom, a boy in his 20s held his phone high, live streaming the disaster with the eagerness of someone who knew this spectacle would get views. My humiliation was trending before I had even straightened my posture. It wasn't just family anymore. It was the world. My father's face had gone pale. He hadn't expected me to refuse so directly. His plan was for me to fold, to nod, and smile, to hand over the penthouse like a prop in Chloe's fairy tale day. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the head table. His voice cracked through the speakers with forced warmth that barely masked his fury. "Don't be selfish, Samantha. It's your sister's wedding day. We are a family. Family makes sacrifices." Sacrifices. That word hung in the air like smoke. For 32 years, sacrifices had always meant me. My career minimized my choices, mocked my successes invisible. Sacrifice meant giving so Chloe could shine. But this time, the sacrifice they wanted was my sanctuary, the one place untouched by their judgments. I stood taller even as whispers rippled through the guests like a current of disapproval. Selfish, cold, too ambitious, too independent. Words they had whispered about me for years now echoed openly across the ballroom. I could see Chloe across the room. Her hands were delicately pressed to her chest, her mouth forming an O of surprise. But I knew that look too well. She had known all along. Her eyes glistened with the practiced tears of someone who had never been denied. She turned to her husband-to-be, his arm wrapping protectively around her as if I were the villain in this story. It was a performance and the audience was eating it up. My mother stepped forward, her beaded gown glittering under the lights, the microphone still in her hand. Her voice lowered but carried through the speakers. "Hand over the keys, Samantha. Do it now." Her eyes burned with humiliation and rage, as if my refusal had exposed her deepest fear, that her carefully constructed image of a perfect family was nothing more than glass waiting to shatter. Around us, relatives muttered, urging me to comply. Aunt Marjorie's shrill whisper cut through the crowd. "It's family, Samantha. You don't even have a family of your own. Chloe needs it more." I kept my eyes on the earring. The diamond caught the light, throwing a tiny reflection onto the polished floor. It looked like a star that had fallen out of the sky, small but defiant. I bent down slowly, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble, echoing in the silence. Every guest held their breath, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to pick up that earring with trembling hands. But when I rose, I was steady. I slipped the earring back into place, fastening it as if sealing a vow. When I straightened, I lifted my chin and finally let my voice carry across the ballroom. It is my property. I have not agreed to anything. Gasps spread through the room like fire. The photographer's flash went off in rapid bursts, desperate to capture the family drama that was unfolding. The cameras of strangers recorded not just a wedding, but the fracture of an entire family's facade. My father's hand tightened on his champagne glass until I thought it might break. My mother's jaw clenched so tightly, her words came out through gritted teeth. You ungrateful girl. Everything we have done for you, and this is how you repay us. Everything they had done for me. I almost laughed. What they had done was remind me year after year that I was never enough unless I was giving something away. They wanted my success without acknowledging it. They wanted the penthouse as proof that Chloe deserved more than me even when I had built it with my own hands, my own nights without sleep, my own deals closed in boardrooms, where I was the only woman. And now they wanted to take it in front of everyone, as if erasing me publicly would finally make me disappear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I simply spoke into the stillness that followed. If Chloe's happiness depends on taking what is mine, then perhaps we should examine what happiness really means. The hush was immediate, heavy, and undeniable. Even the waitstaff froze mid-step, trays balanced in their hands. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me, but for the first time I felt no need to shrink under them. My mother's face twisted, and before I could step back, her hand lashed out. The crack of the slap echoed louder than the applause had minutes before. Gasps erupted, followed by a stunned silence so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers. My cheek burned, but I didn't move. I didn't reach up. I let the silence speak for me. The microphone still in her hand had carried the sound of her slap across the speakers, magnified for every ear to hear. There was no hiding it now, no pretending it hadn't happened. I looked straight ahead, not at her, not at Chloe, but at the guests who were suddenly shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some lowered their eyes, some kept recording, and some business executives, investors, people who knew my name outside of family dinners, sat rigid, their faces unreadable, but their judgment unmistakable. They had seen everything. They had seen the slap. They had heard the demand. They had watched me stand firm. I turned back to my mother, my voice steady and cold. Congratulations, Chloe. I hope your marriage brings you joy. Then I picked up my clutch from the table, the metallic clasp clicking shut like a gavel. I walked toward the ballroom doors, each step measured, each heel strike echoing like a countdown. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I walked with the same poise I used when leaving board meetings after delivering final words that ended negotiations. Behind me, voices rose in chaos. My father's frantic call, my mother's shriek, Chloe's wailing sobs, but I didn't turn around. The cameras followed me until the doors closed, shutting out the cacophony. As the elevator descended, my phone buzzed with 3 missed calls and a text that made my pulse quicken. Saw the live stream. On standby. Waiting for your signal. The message was from David Liu, the CEO who held 40% of my father's company and the man who had mentored me through every major deal. He was already watching, and he was ready. I touched the cheek that still burned from the slap. I thought of the earrings spinning under the chandelier, the silence that had followed the eyes of 200 guests locked on me. That moment was not an ending, it was a beginning. And as the elevator doors opened into the quiet of the hotel lobby, I knew the fallout would shake not just my family, but the empire my father had built. They thought they had humiliated me. What they had really done was set everything in motion. When I was a child, I learned very quickly that nothing I did was ever enough unless it was framed against Chloe's glow. My grades were always excellent. I worked hard, stayed up late with books stacked around me, memorizing every detail of history, mathematics, and literature. But when I ran down the stairs, clutching my report card with straight A's, my mother's eyes only lingered for a second before drifting to Chloe, who was twirling in her pink dress in the living room. Carol smiled at her little ballerina and said, How graceful, how beautiful, how charming. Then she looked back at me and nodded politely, as if straight A's were merely a decent habit like brushing my teeth. I remember one evening in particular. I was 8 years old, and I had just won a spelling bee at school. I stood in the kitchen doorway clutching the small gold trophy so tightly my knuckles ached. Dad was reading the newspaper, Mom was setting candles on the dinner table, and Chloe was sitting there with curls bouncing around her shoulders. I cleared my throat trying to get their attention. I said I won. They looked up. Dad smiled faintly and said, "That's nice, Samantha. But did you hear Chloe played piano for the school assembly today?" Everyone clapped. Carol clapped right there in the kitchen as if Chloe had performed in Carnegie Hall. She lit the candles, the wax dripping, the flames dancing, and all I could see was Chloe's face glowing in that golden light while I stood in the shadow holding my little trophy that suddenly felt like nothing. Candles. They became a symbol for me. In our house, every family dinner was staged like a performance. Mom always lit candles, tall white tapers that flickered against the polished wood. The glow always seemed to catch Chloe's hair, making her look like a portrait of innocence and light. For me, seated just across the angle of the light, always left me in darkness. That was how it felt every meal, every year. Chloe shining me unseen. As I grew older, the comparisons only sharpened. When Chloe brought home art projects, my parents displayed them on the fridge. My essays, the ones that won competitions, were filed away in drawers. When Chloe tripped during a recital, everyone consoled her, telling her she was brave. When I lost a soccer game after scoring 2 goals, I was told to work harder, to focus more. The scales were never balanced. It was always her charm versus my discipline. And in their eyes, charm always triumphed. By the time high school came, the script was set. Chloe was the princess. Sweet, delicate, the girl who could light up a room. I was the one who wore practical clothes, who volunteered for the debate team, who spent weekends interning at the library. Instead of going to dances, relatives would whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. Poor Carol. At least she has Chloe. Samantha is too serious, too ambitious, too much like a boy. Aunt Marjorie once said to me directly that men wouldn't like me if I kept acting so competitively. I smiled at her then, but that comment seared into me. There were times I wanted to scream. Times when I wanted to throw every achievement in their faces and demand recognition. But something inside me knew it was useless. Their eyes were already trained toward Chloe. I started to turn my hunger for approval into a hunger for independence. If they wouldn't clap for me at home, then I would earn applause in boardrooms. If they couldn't see me at the dinner table, then I would make the world see me from the top floors of skyscrapers. That's how my fire was lit. Every dismissal was fuel. Every time Dad said, "Family comes first. Samantha, your time will come if you ever settle down." I silently translated his words. He meant to settle down into smallness. He meant to stop threatening Chloe's spotlight. But I refused. Fast forward to adulthood. I was 32, standing in that ballroom, but inside me were still the echoes of all those dinners, all those candles, all those shadows. The scars of favoritism don't disappear when you leave home. They live under your skin, waiting to be pressed by moments like the one at Chloe's wedding. I had paid $40,000 for that wedding. That was the part no one saw. 3 months earlier, Dad called me, his voice casual, almost careless. He said, "Weddings are expensive, Samantha. Chloe deserves a perfect day. You'll help, of course." He didn't ask. He assumed. And I wired the money without protest, not because I owed them, but because I thought maybe, just maybe, that contribution would earn a moment of acknowledgement. Instead, it became invisible. At the wedding, they spoke endlessly of Chloe's beauty, her selflessness, her radiance. My name was never mentioned. My $40,000 vanished into floral arrangements and orchestras and sparkling wine, all credited back to Chloe's charm. I sat through those speeches, through those comparisons, through the endless chorus of admiration for my sister. And in every glowing candlelight, I saw my childhood repeated. Chloe is radiant. I'm invisible. My penthouse, my career, my sacrifices all swallowed by their narrative that she was the daughter worth celebrating. The irony was bitter. In my professional life, I was Samantha Reed, Vice President of Development, the woman who closed multi-million-dollar deals across Asia, who negotiated partnerships with global corporations, who could walk into a room of powerful men and leave with their respect. But in my parents' eyes, I was still the difficult daughter. Too ambitious, too independent, not soft enough, not married, not producing grandchildren. Sitting at that reception, I felt the weight of every childhood dinner pressing down on me. I could hear the whispers even now. Still no ring on her finger. Still too picky, still too career-focused. My cousin Derek smirked at me across the table, and I heard him mutter under his breath to a friend. Maybe if she spent less time in boardrooms, she'd have someone beside her tonight. The laughter that followed was like sandpaper against my skin. I wanted to tell them about the men I had dated, the ones who couldn't handle a woman more successful than they. I wanted to tell them being single was my choice, not my failure. But what was the point? They had already written my role in this family's script. The flash of the chandelier flickered above, reminding me again of those candles at childhood dinners. Chloe was once again in the light, her dress glowing, her smile rehearsed. I was once again in the shadow, my voice drowned by the noise of praise. But unlike that little girl with the trophy in her hands, I was no longer powerless. I had built something beyond their reach. I had built a life that didn't need their validation. As I watched Chloe glide through the crowd, being admired, being adored, I thought of my penthouse, the sanctuary I had bought with my own money, with my own blood and hours. 4,500 square feet of space that proved I could stand on my own. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the view that reminded me every morning who I had become. That home was more than property. It was proof. It was dignity. And when I heard my parents whispering about giving it to Chloe as a gift, I realized just how deep their blindness went. They thought my sacrifices were endless. They thought I was still that girl in the shadows willing to step back to hand over my light. But they were wrong. The past explains the present. Every slap of dismissal in childhood prepared me for the slap I endured in that ballroom. Every time they compared me to Chloe, they prepared me to stand tall when they demanded I give away my sanctuary. And every candle that cast me into darkness built the fire that now burns inside me. The truth is, scars of favoritism never vanish. They shape you. They whisper in the back of your mind when you walk into rooms. They remind you that love can be conditional, and that sometimes the family who should lift you can be the very people who keep you small. But scars also strengthen. They remind you of what you survived. And when the moment comes, they give you the steel to say no. As the ballroom hummed back into noise, laughter, and speeches praising Chloe, I felt my body present, but my mind was drifting between past and present. I was the little girl again, clutching her trophy in the shadows of candlelight. I was the teenager again, hearing Aunt Marjorie say men would never want me. I was the adult wiring $40,000 to a family that would never admit my worth. And now I was the woman standing with diamond earrings glinting, refusing to surrender my penthouse, my sanctuary, my dignity. I sat quietly sipping champagne that tasted bitter. Around me, voices rose, guests complimented Chloe's gown, her smile, her perfect marriage. None of them knew what was coming. None of them knew that the slap they had witnessed was not just a moment of humiliation. It was the breaking of the old script. From the shadows of my childhood to the blinding light of that ballroom, I had carried the same truth. I would never be enough for them, no matter what I gave. So I stopped giving. The candles of my childhood are long gone, but in their place is a fire that belongs only to me. And as the laughter of the guests faded into the background, as the clinking of glasses pulled me back to the present, I knew this story was no longer about being invisible. It was about finally being seen on my own terms. The morning of the wedding arrived, draped in gold sunlight and the hum of preparation. I walked into the Grandview Hotel ballroom at 8 o'clock sharp, the echo of my heels sharp against marble that gleamed like it had been polished just for Chloe's big day. Rows of white roses climbed up crystal vases, gold ribbons tied every chair into submission, and chandeliers above dripped with light so pure it looked stolen from heaven. It was a room designed for fairy tales for a bride who had been groomed since birth to be adored. My younger sister had dreamed of this since we were children, cutting pictures of wedding gowns out of magazines while I scribbled notes for school debates. And now the dream was alive all around me. I should have felt pride for her. Instead, I felt the sharp sting of being cast once again as a background character in her story. Carol saw me first. Her eyes swept me from head to toe and stopped at my navy silk dress. She tilted her head, her lips curving in that half smile I knew so well. Too masculine, Samantha. Could you not have chosen something softer, more feminine, more suitable for your sister's wedding? I smoothed the fabric at my hip, knowing it fell perfectly tailored with elegance, modest and professional. Good morning to you too, Mom, I said calmly, but my words were swallowed by the echo of workers adjusting tablecloths and tuning violins. She had already turned away, gliding toward Chloe, who floated into the room in a robe of ivory silk, her hair in rollers, her face glowing with the anticipation of the princess she believed she was born to be. My father's voice boomed across the ballroom like a gavel. Samantha, come check the seating arrangements, will you? But don't reorganize everything like you always do. I walked over to the chart propped against an easel. One glance told me it was a disaster. Divorced couples seated side by side, business rivals placed at the same table, entire clusters of guests mismatched like puzzle pieces forced together. My hands itched to fix it, to do what I had always done, quietly repair chaos before it exploded. But I heard my father's warning echoing behind me. Don't reorganize everything. It was always the same. My instinct to correct to improve was recast as meddling. My discipline became criticism. My foresight became arrogance. And Chloe's whims were celebrated as creativity. I bent closer to the chart anyway, straightening a crooked name card. My fingers brushed against the glossy paper, and in that small act I saw my own reflection. Always trying to align what others had carelessly thrown together. Always being told it wasn't welcome. Richard came up beside me, smelling of cologne and authority. Family comes first, Samantha. You will understand that when you have your own family. If you ever settle down, that is. His chuckle was quiet but sharp enough to cut. I bit my tongue until I tasted iron, keeping my face calm though my chest burned. My Aunt Marjorie leaned close with her syrupy tone. Not everyone can be as lucky as Chloe finding love so young. Her words dripped with the kind of pity that is really just mockery. I shifted my gaze to the ballroom itself, trying to let the grandeur distract me. Tall arrangements of lilies reached toward the ceiling. Gold-rimmed plates gleamed on tables draped in white satin, and a small army of waiters moved like clockwork polishing glasses, adjusting cutlery by fractions of an inch. It was stunning, yes, but to me, it felt suffocating. Every detail screamed perfection, yet the undercurrent was toxic. This wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a theater stage to remind me of my role, the supporting cast. Chloe waltzed over, laughter bubbling from her like champagne. Samantha, doesn't it all look magical? Her eyes glittered as if daring me to disagree. I nodded politely. She twirled, letting the silk of her robe catch the light, and whispered loudly enough for others to hear. I cannot wait for tonight. Wait for... There will be an announcement that shows what family really means. She kissed Mom on the cheek and floated away again, her entourage following. The words clung to me like smoke. An announcement. What family really means. I knew the tone. I knew the weight behind it. My stomach tightened with dread. There was something planned, something staged, and I was the target. I busied myself with the flowers on a nearby table, fingers adjusting a centerpiece of white roses and baby's breath. The arrangement leaned slightly, one rose drooping awkwardly, its head too heavy. I set it upright, tucking the stem deeper until it stood straight. A simple act, a habit of mine to set things right. Yet in that moment, I felt the sting of my father's words, "Don't reorganize everything." I pulled my hand back, curling it into a fist under the tablecloth. My knuckles pressed against the fabric, hidden but tight. Workers bustled around me, laughter and chatter filling the room, yet in my mind, I could hear the ghosts of every correction I had ever tried to make. "Don't be so difficult, Samantha. Stop being controlling. Why can't you just let things be?" But I wasn't controlling. I was careful. It wasn't difficult. I was determined. They never saw the difference. To them, my strength was a flaw, a sharp edge against Chloe's soft glow. Carol passed by again, whispering to an aunt. "Samantha always looks like she's heading to a board meeting. She never learned how to soften." The aunt chuckled, her pearls rattling as if in agreement. I stood taller, letting the words roll off, though inside they etched another mark onto a wall of scars already thick with years of dismissal. The morning stretched on, but every minute felt like a rehearsal for something darker. Chloe's laughter echoed like bells. Dad's voice boomed with directives. Mom floated from table to table, gathering compliments like confetti. And me, I moved quietly through the room, straightening a flower here, adjusting a napkin there, careful not to draw too much attention. But every detail I touched felt like a metaphor. I was always the one to fix, but never the one to be thanked. At one point, my cousin Derek leaned against a pillar, smirking. "Still no date with you, Sam. Maybe if you smiled more, you'd have someone on your arm." His friends snorted and they clinked glasses, amused at their own cruelty. I felt the heat rise to my face, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I turned away, letting my eyes rest on the chandeliers above. Their crystals refracted light into 1,000 tiny beams, dazzling, distracting. They reminded me of the candles from childhood dinners, of Chloe glowing in their light while I sat in shadow. But I was not a child anymore. I had built something they could not take lightly. Yet I knew with a certainty that chilled me that they would try. Tonight, Mom had said. Tonight, Dad had hinted. Tonight there would be an announcement about what family really means. As I left the ballroom to catch my breath in the corridor, I pressed my palm flat against the cool marble wall. It steadied me, grounded me. I thought of my penthouse miles away, standing tall against the skyline, its windows catching the morning sun, my sanctuary, my proof. I inhaled deeply, letting the image of those windows steady me. Because whatever announcement they were planning, whatever ambush they had rehearsed, I knew I would need every ounce of calm to face it. Back inside, the music swelled as the string quartet began rehearsing. The air smelled of roses and polished silver. Chloe floated through the crowd, radiant in her half-done bridal makeup, basking in the attention as if she were already on stage. Mom whispered again to another aunt, "Tonight will be unforgettable. You'll see." Richard nodded solemnly beside her. "Family means everything. Tonight proves that." Their words rang like a warning bell. I returned to the table where I had straightened the roses earlier. The bloom had drooped again, stubborn, heavy with its own weight. I touched it lightly, then pulled my hand back, curling my fingers into a fist once more. My fist stayed hidden beneath the table as I forced a smile at the workers nearby. The rose leaned, refusing to be corrected, refusing to stand tall. In that small defiance of a flower, I saw myself. I saw what they hated in me, and I saw what they planned to crush. The day had only just begun, yet the night already loomed like a storm on the horizon. The ballroom was nearly full by the time the reception began, guests arriving in waves of perfume and polished shoes, voices bouncing off the high ceilings. Laughter echoed from every corner, glasses clinked, and forks tapped against plates. I stood near a window, pretending to study the skyline, while in truth I was bracing myself for what I already knew would come. In a family like mine, there was always a moment when I would be pushed back into my shadow. It came faster than I expected. Aunt Marjorie's voice rang out across a small group gathered by the floral arrangements. She asked me about my little apartment in the city. Must be cozy, she said, smiling sweetly, the kind of smile that hides a knife. The women around her laughed soft but sharp. I felt the sting of it, though I kept my back straight. It's a penthouse, actually, I answered quietly, hoping perhaps the truth would soften the jab. But my words were fuel for more laughter. Aunt Marjorie wiped at her eyes, overcome with amusement. A penthouse. Oh, Samantha, you and your exaggerations. Chloe drifted over, then radiant in her gown, her hand resting dramatically on her chest as she joined the laughter. She teased last year. She said she was buying a Tesla. Can you imagine? My smile stayed frozen. The Tesla was parked outside, gleaming black in the valet circle, but I said nothing. The penthouse towered over the city, just blocks from this hotel, 4,500 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows and polished stone. But again, I said nothing. Because in this family, my truth was always treated as fiction, and their narrative was the only one allowed. Uncle Tom leaned closer, his hand heavy on my shoulder. There's no shame in modest living, Sam. Not everyone can afford luxury. His tone was patronizing, dripping with false comfort. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice level. You're right, Uncle. There's no shame in living within your means. My words fell like pebbles into a roaring river of conversation quickly swept away. Chloe laughed again, tinkling and perfect, the sound my parents had always adored. See, Samantha is learning to be realistic. The group nodded satisfied and drifted back into their chatter. I stood still, invisible once more, my existence flattened into a caricature they could dismiss. They never believed me. No matter what I said, no matter what I achieved, I was always the exaggerator, the difficult one, the daughter who needed humbling. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out discreetly, grateful for the distraction. On the screen was a photo from my assistant taken just that morning from my penthouse balcony. The city stretched beneath a sky painted gold, the sun rising behind towers of glass and steel. The caption read simply, "Your sanctuary awaits your return, boss." The glow of the screen reflected onto my face, a soft light in the dim corner where I stood. It was a reminder, sharp and grounding. Whatever they said, whatever they believed, the truth lived in the spaces I had built for myself. That home was mine, every inch paid for, with nights of missed sleep, years of grinding work, endless flights across oceans, deals struck in rooms full of men who underestimated me until they didn't. 10 years of building. That was how long it had taken me to climb from entry-level analyst to vice president of development. 10 years of proving myself again and again, carrying binders heavier than my frame, drafting contracts under the hum of fluorescent lights while others celebrated holidays with their families. 10 years of red-eye flights, of learning to sleep in airport lounges, of forcing myself to be sharper, faster, stronger, because being a woman in finance meant no one gave you grace for being tired. I thought of Singapore, the deal that had changed everything. The way I sat in a glass tower overlooking the harbor, my voice steady as I outlined terms worth millions, knowing that every word would decide whether I sank or rose. I remembered the moment I signed, the room falling silent, the weight of success pressing down on me. That deal had bought the penthouse. That deal had put me on the map. That deal had proved I wasn't invisible, not everywhere. But here among my own blood, it was as if none of it mattered. My parents never asked about my work, never read the articles where my name was printed, never noticed the industry awards that sat in my office. They asked about Chloe's charity events instead, about her new recipes, about the color of her curtains. They compared me unfavorably even when I wasn't in the room, and when I was, they did it more loudly. Around me, guests whispered, "Still no ring on Samantha's finger." All that time in the city, you'd think she'd have found someone. Poor Carol. At least she has Chloe giving her grandchildren soon. My cousin Derek's voice rose above the rest, smirking across the room. Maybe if you spent less time in boardrooms and more time in normal rooms, you'd have a +1 today. The laughter rippled outward, another wave of dismissal. I clenched my phone in my hand, the screen still glowing with the photo of my penthouse sunrise. That image was my anchor proof of the life I had fought for. I wanted to lift the phone, show them the photo, show them the articles, show them the feature in Architectural Digest that had displayed my home like a jewel. I wanted to scream that I wasn't lying, that I wasn't exaggerating, that I wasn't the difficult one. But what good would it do? They would only laugh louder. So I stayed silent. I let them think what they wanted. I pressed the phone to my chest, the light fading as the screen went dark. The symbol of my success was hidden again like it had been my entire life. The music swelled as the quartet began another rehearsal piece. Glasses clinked, laughter rolled. Chloe glided by again, her gown sparkling under the chandeliers, her smile rehearsed to perfection. I stood in my corner, invisible, the same role I had been cast in since childhood. I remembered all the nights I had walked alone through city streets, briefcase heavy heels echoing on concrete, knowing no one was waiting for me at home. I remembered eating takeout at my desk, eyes burning from the blue light of spreadsheets, telling myself it was worth it, and it was. And because those sacrifices had built something undeniable. But denial was what my family did best. The irony struck me hard. Strangers respected me more than my own blood did. Business leaders listened to my voice, but my parents barely heard me when I spoke. Investors trusted me with millions, but my family didn't believe I owned the car parked outside. I was a ghost in their eyes, a story they refused to rewrite no matter how much truth I placed in front of them. The laughter rose again. Someone made another joke about me being too picky, too ambitious, too cold. I let the words wash over me, no longer resisting. Because deep down, I knew. Their blindness was not my burden. Their refusal to see me was not my failure. The photo on my phone was burned into my mind. The caption whispered louder than all their jeers. Your sanctuary awaits. I drew a slow breath, forcing my shoulders to relax, letting the noise fade into a dull hum. I looked at Chloe glowing in the chandelier light, adored and praised. And I looked inward at the fire I had carried since childhood, the fire that had built my sanctuary, the fire that would protect me from whatever ambush they had planned. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was small. But they had no idea how tall I stood when they weren't looking. The ballroom roared with celebration, but inside me there was silence, steady and unshakable. And as my phone buzzed again, a new notification flashing on the screen, I knew this silence was only temporary. The storm they had planned for tonight was coming, and this time I would not be the one left in the shadows. The clatter of silverware and the swell of voices filled the ballroom like an ocean. I slipped away from the crowd, needing a moment to breathe, my heels tapping against the polished hallway floor as I moved toward the service corridor. I had grown accustomed to hiding in the margins at family events, but this time I wasn't looking for silence. I was looking for clarity. That was when I heard them. Their voices carried through the half-open door of a side room. Richard's low tone was firm, almost rehearsed. We'll announce the penthouse during the toast. My breath caught in my throat. I froze in the doorway, my body pressed against the cool marble wall, every nerve alive. Carol's voice followed, sharp and certain. She won't dare refuse in front of everyone. It will be perfect. 200 guests are watching. She'll be trapped. My pulse hammered in my ears. It wasn't just an idea tossed out in the heat of celebration. It wasn't a spontaneous demand. It was a plan carefully staged, designed to corner me. I leaned closer, careful not to be seen. Richard's voice dropped lower, as if confiding a secret. Think about it. The timing is perfect. After the champagne is poured, the speech is made, we step forward and declare her gift to Chloe. It will seal the evening. Our friends, our business partners, everyone will applaud. They'll see what family really means. Carol let out a small laugh, smooth and satisfied. And Samantha, with her pride, with her ambition, she won't risk the shame of saying no. Not in front of all those eyes. My hand trembled where it rested against the wall. The words sliced through me colder than any slap. It was an ambush dressed up as love coated in the sugar of family pride, and it had been rehearsed. Every moment of this wedding had been staged, and I was to be the final act, the unwilling benefactor to Chloe's fairy tale. The sound of their footsteps shifted. I moved back quickly, heart racing, and ducked into the shadow of a column as they emerged, smiling arms linked, as if they had merely been discussing the weather. Carol adjusted her necklace, her gown glittering under the hallway light, while Richard's expression was calm, almost smug. They passed me without noticing, heading back into the ballroom. I stayed hidden, my back pressed to the wall, forcing my breath to slow. The pieces were falling into place. The snide comments about my dress, the whispers about family coming first, and Chloe's cryptic promise of an announcement. It all led here. They had decided my sanctuary would become Chloe's stage, and they would strip it from me with applause ringing in their ears. I stepped back into the ballroom slowly, my eyes scanning the room with new vision. Every detail now looked like part of their trap. The champagne glasses were polished and waiting. The string quartet was rehearsing the delicate notes that would play under Richard's toast. The microphone gleaming on the head table was placed carefully between the floral arrangements. I stared at it, the black metal catching the light. Whoever held it would control the story. Whoever spoke into it would decide the truth. The crowd swirled around me, oblivious. Guests laughed and toasted waiters carried trays of hors d'oeuvres. Chloe floated by in her glittering gown, radiant and adored. And I stood in the corner, aware of the storm brewing in the heart of the room. Uncle Tom intercepted me, his hand heavy on my shoulder once again. "Samantha, enjoy yourself. It's not every day your little sister gets married." I smiled faintly, forcing my voice steady. "Of course, Uncle." He nodded approvingly, as if I had passed some unspoken test of humility. He had no idea of the knife poised above me. I returned to my table, the centerpiece of roses tilting slightly. I reached to straighten one bloom, pushing it gently upright, but this time my hand lingered longer. My fingers tightened around the stem until I felt the thorns press into my skin. I let go, curling my hand into a fist beneath the tablecloth. The flower leaned again, heavy-headed, unwilling to be tamed. From across the room I caught Richard's gaze. He was speaking with a group of business associates, his hands gesturing broadly, laughter spilling from the circle. Yet when his eyes met mine, there was something cold and calculated. He raised his glass slightly as if toasting me from afar. My stomach turned. He was rehearsing already. Carol was no better. She glided from table to table, her voice carrying compliments for Chloe, her laughter timed perfectly with each guest's flattery. She thrived in this spotlight, orchestrating it with every gesture, every smile. And beneath it all, she carried the secret of the ambush tucked into the folds of her beaded gown like a weapon. I sat still, watching, waiting, listening to the hum of voices around me. Pacing quickened in my mind even as I kept my body calm. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs, sharp and fast. Every sound in the ballroom felt magnified. The clink of cutlery, the swell of music, the shuffle of waiters preparing champagne flutes. It was all building toward the moment they would strike. Then Chloe appeared beside me, her gown brushing against my dress as she leaned down. "Isn't it beautiful, Samantha? The way everything has come together, tonight will be unforgettable." Her smile was radiant, but her eyes flickered with something sharper, a glimmer of anticipation. She touched my arm lightly, almost tenderly, and then floated away before I could answer. I stared after her, the weight of her words sinking in. Tonight will be unforgettable. Of course it would. She knew. She had always known. This was her coronation, and I was the crown they intended to place on her head, whether I agreed or not. The music shifted, signaling the approach of the reception speeches. Waiters began pouring champagne, the bubbles rising in crystal flutes. The guests settled, the laughter quieting into expectant murmurs. My father moved toward the head table, his expression calm, confident, a man about to deliver the perfect finale. Carol took her seat beside him, her hand resting on his arm. The microphone waited between them, black and gleaming, the symbol of their control. I watched it intently, my vision narrowing. That microphone would carry their words, their lie, their theft. It would broadcast to every ear in the room that I was generous, selfless, and willing to hand over my home for family. It would trap me, force me into silence because what daughter could shame her parents by refusing in such a moment? But I knew the truth. I had heard their whispers, their plan, their certainty that I would fold. She won't dare refuse, Carol had said. They believed my silence was weakness. They believed my restraint was a surrender. I reached for my clutch, my fingers brushing the metal clasp. Inside, my phone buzzed faintly with notifications. I ignored them, my eyes locked on the microphone. My breath slowed, steadying. If they thought I would be trapped, they had forgotten one thing. I was no longer the child in the shadows. Richard lifted his glass, tapping it gently with a spoon. The clear chime rang out, commanding silence. The room hushed instantly, all eyes turning toward the head table. The string quartet quieted. The waiters froze. The moment had arrived. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding, but my face calm. The light from the chandeliers glinted off the microphone as Richard reached for it. My vision sharpened, every detail etched in my mind. The white roses, the gold ribbons, the crystal glasses all blurred into the background. Only the microphone remained clear, glowing under the light, waiting to tell the story of this night. I inhaled once deeply, the sound of it lost in the hush. And as Richard's fingers closed around the microphone, I knew the ambush was about to begin. Richard's spoon struck the crystal glass with a sharp chime that sliced through the chatter like a blade. The ballroom fell silent in an instant. 200 faces turned toward the head table, their smiles expectant, their bodies leaning forward as though a secret was about to be shared. The string quartet lowered their bows, the last notes of music dissolving into the heavy air. I knew this moment was coming. I had heard them planning it. Still, the sound of that glass ringing out made my pulse quicken. Richard rose slowly, commanding the room with the gravitas of a man used to having the final word. He straightened his tuxedo, lifted his champagne flute high, and smiled with the confidence of someone certain the evening was about to peak in glory. Family and friends. He began, his voice amplified by the microphone, warm and authoritative. Tonight we celebrate not only Chloe and Daniel's union, but also the strength of family that binds us all. Carol beamed beside him, her hand lightly resting on his arm, her diamonds sparkling as if they too anticipated triumph. The guests murmured approval, glasses lifted, heads nodded. Richard's voice deepened, every word deliberate. At this moment, we wish to make a very special announcement. He paused, letting suspense gather like static in the air. Carol's eyes flicked to me, gleaming with certainty. Richard continued. My eldest daughter Samantha has graciously agreed to gift her penthouse as a wedding present to Chloe and Daniel. The words detonated across the ballroom. Gasps turned into applause. Applause swelled into cheers, and chairs scraped as people rose to their feet. 200 voices merged into a roar of celebration. Hands clapped, champagne sloshed, cameras flashed. I felt the light of every lens on my skin. Faces turned toward me with admiration, as though I had become a saint in that instant. The air was thick with expectation. My chest tightened. I heard Chloe gasp theatrically, her hand flying to her mouth. She whispered, "Oh my God," as if the news had fallen like a blessing from heaven. She glanced at me, eyes brimming with staged tears, then turned to Daniel, who wrapped his arm around her. They embraced, smiling widely, a perfect photograph of gratitude. The cameras clicked in rapid fire, the flashes so relentless, they burned white spots across my vision. I blinked, but the strobe continued, evidence being gathered, each frame immortalizing a lie. My breath came slow and shallow. The room pulsed with the rhythm of applause, of expectation, pressing like a weight on my shoulders. Richard held out his arm toward me. "Samantha, come forward. Let us share this moment as a family." The crowd clapped louder, chanting softly, urging me to stand. Faces leaned toward me, waiting for my smile, waiting for my compliance. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I ignored it. My palms rested flat against the tablecloth, cool and steady. I rose slowly. The applause faltered into an anticipatory hush. Every step I took toward the center of the room sounded like a drumbeat echoing against marble and glass. My diamond earrings swung gently, catching the chandelier light. My face remained calm, my spine straight. Richard extended the microphone toward me, his smile broad, his eyes gleaming with victory. I did not take it. Instead, I let my voice cut through the silence clear and sharp without amplification. I am sorry, what murmurs rippled across the crowd. Richard's smile twitched. Your penthouse sweetheart, for Chloe and Daniel. It is your gift. His words rang through the speakers confident but tinged with unease. I met his gaze unwavering. This was not discussed with me. My tone was cool, measured, each syllable deliberate. A fresh wave of whispers surged through the room. Carol leaned forward, snatching the microphone. Don't be selfish on your sister's day, Samantha, she commanded, her voice shrill beneath the guise of sweetness. The cameras flashed again, blinding. I blinked through the light, my face illuminated in fragments, the crowd waiting for my submission. Chloe's tears fell perfectly on cue, her voice trembling. Samantha. I thought you wanted me to be happy. Her tone was soft, accusing, every syllable crafted to wound. I turned my head toward her, my expression unreadable. Your happiness does not require my home, Chloe. A gasp ran through the guests, sharp as a slap. Someone whispered cruelly. Another hissed ungrateful. The words sliced, but I stood steady. Richard stepped forward, voice booming. It's just a property, Samantha. You can buy another one. Then you buy her one. I replied, my words cutting clean, my voice firm. The room erupted with gasps. Someone clutched their chest. Another shook their head in disbelief. Flashes burst like lightning, each click of a shutter freezing my defiance into history. Carol's face flushed crimson. Her grip on the microphone trembled. She hissed into it, the sound magnified. After everything we've done for you, after everything we've sacrificed, you refuse this one thing. You disgrace us. I stood tall, my hands at my sides. No trembling, no tears. I had negotiated with men who threatened millions. I had faced boardrooms colder than this ballroom. I would not bow. It is my property, I repeated slowly, each word steady. And I haven't agreed to anything. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the waiters froze mid-step, trays balanced in their hands, every ear strained for what would come next. Chloe's sobs filled the void, practiced and precise, her mascara streaking delicately. Uncle Tom's voice broke the stillness. She's getting married, starting her life. What do you need all that space for, Samantha? My eyes flicked toward him. That is generous of you to assume, Uncle, I said calmly. But my finances are not up for public discussion. A murmur rippled, sharp and judgmental. Everything's about money with you, Carol spat, her voice raw. Your sister's happiness should matter more than property. If her happiness depends on taking what is mine, perhaps we should examine that, I replied. Another round of gasps, louder now, some even boos from the back. Yet in the front row, I saw a few faces harden with recognition. Business partners, executives, men and women who knew coercion when they saw it. The cameras never stopped. Flash after flash seared the air, turning every second into evidence. My cheek burned where Carol's hand had struck earlier, and the mark would glow brighter under those lights, proof etched onto my skin. Richard's face darkened. He turned back to the microphone, voice raised desperate. Family comes first, Samantha. You know that. You will not embarrass us tonight. I breathed in slowly, holding his gaze, and let my answer drop like a stone into water. Family does not ambush each other. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the relentless clicking of cameras. Every eye was on us, the story unfolding in real time, impossible to contain. Carol's fury spilled over, her voice shaking. Everyone, my daughter seems to have forgotten what family means. Perhaps you can remind her. She extended her arm toward me, beckoning the crowd's judgment. But the tide was turning. I saw the uncertainty in some faces, the discomfort in others. The spectacle had gone too far. The applause had curdled into unease. Richard's voice cracked as he attempted to recover. Samantha, please, don't ruin this night. I lifted my chin, the flashes reflecting in my eyes. The night was already ruined. Not by me, but by the hand that struck my face, by the voices that plotted my humiliation, by the lie dressed as generosity. I looked at the cameras, at the guests, at the glittering chandeliers above. My voice carried strong and final. The penthouse is not available. The words hung in the air, irrevocable, undeniable. The cameras flashed one last time, sealing the truth. Carol's face twisted. Richard's shoulders sagged. Chloe's sobs faltered. And I stood calm, illuminated by light, no longer invisible. The applause did not return. The silence remained heavy and unforgettable. The sound of my mother's hand meeting my face cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot. For a moment, time fractured. The chandeliers trembled above me, every crystal shard catching the light, as if the universe itself had flinched. Then came the silence, heavy, absolute, a silence so deep I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. 200 guests froze in place, champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips, forks paused above plates, conversations severed mid-sentence. Even the children at the far table stopped fidgeting. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. My cheek burned hot where her palm had struck the sting, blooming outward in waves. But I didn't move. I didn't touch it. I stood still, spine straight, eyes steady. If humiliation was what she wanted, she would not have it. Not this time. Cameras that had been snapping joy a moment ago now clicked in frantic bursts, every flash white-hot against my skin. The microphone in Carol's hand picked up her ragged breathing, magnifying it so the whole ballroom could hear her loss of composure. Her other hand still hovered mid-air, fingers trembling, as if even she couldn't believe what she had done. I saw Richard half rise from his chair, his face, pale lips pressed into a thin line. Chloe had her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide in what might have been horror or might have been the thrill of being center stage yet again. Daniel froze, caught between trying to comfort her and not daring to move against my parents. Around us, whispers swirled like smoke. Did she just slap her? Oh my God. Someone gasped so loudly it echoed. But no one spoke directly to me. No one asked if I was all right. They all just stared, waiting for me to crumble. The diamond earring, dislodged by the blow, arced through the air, spinning in slow motion until it landed with a delicate ping on the marble floor. It skittered once, twice, and then spun under the chandelier's glow, a tiny star fallen to earth. Every eye followed it. That earring had been my own gift to myself, bought with the bonus from closing the Tokyo deal, a symbol that I did not need their applause to shine. And now it lay abandoned on the cold floor, as if my dignity had been knocked loose with it. I let the silence stretch longer than comfort allowed. My chest rose and fell evenly. I bent down slowly, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble echoing in the stillness. I picked up the earring with steady fingers, brushing it once against my palm, then fastening it back into place. That simple act, deliberate, calm, unhurried, felt like a vow. My dignity was mine to reclaim, not theirs to strip away. I straightened, smoothing the silk of my dress with one hand, and turned to face the crowd. Hundreds of eyes locked on me, some wide with pity, others narrowed with judgment, all desperate for a reaction. My voice, when I finally let it spill into the microphone-free air, was steady and clear. Congratulations, Chloe. I hope your marriage brings you joy. The sentence hung in the silence like smoke curling toward the ceiling. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others exhaled, confused by my composure. My mother's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing with no words finding their way out. She clutched the microphone tighter, as if strangling it might give her back control. Richard's voice broke through finally, and a strangled Samantha waited. But I was already moving. I picked up my clutch from the table, the clasp clicking shut with finality. My heels struck the marble in measured rhythm as I walked toward the ballroom doors. Not rushing, not fleeing. Walking with the same deliberate poise I carried out of boardrooms where I had just ended multi-million-dollar negotiations. The cameras followed me, their flashes popping like lightning in a summer storm. My cheek still burned, but I held my head high. I reached the heavy wooden doors, pushed them open, and stepped into the quiet hallway. As the doors swung closed behind me, the muffled chaos erupted on the other side. Voices shouting, chairs scraping, Carol's sharp cry cutting through, but I did not look back. The silence outside was different. It wasn't oppressive like inside. It was clean cold, like stepping into fresh air after being trapped underground. I leaned against the wall for half a second, inhaling deeply, my heart still pounding, but my mind sharpening. My phone buzzed in my clutch again. I pulled it out. On the screen were 3 missed calls from David Liu, my mentor, my CEO, the man who controlled 40% of my father's company. A text followed, simple and chilling. Saw the live stream. On standby, waiting for your signal. My knees almost gave way. Live stream. Of course. I had seen phones raised, red dots blinking, cameras aimed. It wasn't just the 200 guests who had witnessed the slap. It was the internet. And the internet was faster than wildfire. I opened another notification. The video had already been shared hundreds of times. By the time I refreshed, the number had climbed into the thousands. My humiliation had gone viral, but so had their cruelty. Their ambush was no longer a private scheme. It was public, undeniable, replayed in living rooms and offices across the city. I stared at the screen, the glow illuminating my face in the dim hallway. For years, my parents had controlled the narrative. Samantha is too ambitious. Samantha is too cold. Samantha exaggerates. But not tonight. Tonight, there was proof. The cameras had captured the slap, the demand, the refusal. Evidence etched in pixels that could not be erased. I steadied myself, pressing the phone to my chest for a moment. The glow of the screen faded, leaving the imprint of its light in my mind. I straightened, pulled in another breath, and dialed David's number. He answered on the first ring. "Samantha," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "Green light." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Yes," I whispered. "Execute." He didn't ask again. He didn't need to. We had prepared for this in ways my parents could never have imagined. He was already mobilizing his legal team, already reaching for the documents locked in his office safe. He asked one more thing, his voice softening. "Are you hurt?" I touched my cheek, still hot, still stinging. "Nothing that won't heal," I said, "but make sure you bring the shareholder agreement. The one Richard never read." "Understood," David said, and hung up. I lowered the phone, staring at my reflection in the hallway's polished glass. My cheek glowed red, but my eyes were cold, steady. The silence after the slap had not broken me. It had revealed me. For the first time in my life, I felt the power of stillness, the strength of restraint. I had not shouted. I had not cried. I had simply stood, picked up what was mine, and walked away. Inside, the chaos swirled, but out here in the silence, I felt something else rise within me. A calm fire. Knowing that what had been meant to erase me would instead expose them. The slap had been the loudest sound of the night, but it was my silence afterward that would echo longest. The ballroom doors groaned open, and for a moment the chaos inside faltered. All eyes turned as David Liu stepped across the threshold, his tailored suit cutting a sharp line beneath the chandeliers. At each side of him walked a lawyer in dark gray briefcases, in hand faces like stone. The room seemed to shrink around them. Conversation died mid-breath. Forks clinked once against plates, then silence. Richard froze at the head table, his champagne glass half raised. Carol's painted smile cracked at the edges. Chloe's eyes widened, mascara smudging from her perfectly timed tears. David moved with measured authority, the kind of walk that makes boardrooms fall quiet, the kind that bends a room's gravity toward him. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying without a microphone. The sound sliced through the stillness, low and controlled. "I need a moment of your time." A ripple of confusion ran through the guests. Who was this man striding into a wedding reception with lawyers at his side? Some whispered his name. I saw the flicker of recognition in a few faces. Businessmen who had seen his photo on the cover of Forbes Investors, who knew his reputation as ruthless but fair. David reached the head table, set his hands on the polished wood, and leaned slightly forward. Richard Carroll, we need to clarify something for everyone present. One of the lawyers snapped open a briefcase and drew out a thick folder. Papers landed on the table with a heavy thud right between the wedding bouquet and the champagne flutes. The symbol was undeniable law cutting through spectacle. Richard stammered, his voice thin. This is family business. You have no place here. David's gaze didn't waver. The moment you made it public, Richard, you made it my business. His hand tapped the folder once. And more importantly, you made it a legal business. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Cameras tilted to capture every angle. The video was still streaming, and I could see the red light blinking from a phone at table 6. David's voice carried on steady. Samantha is not some struggling daughter you can coerce into giving away her property. She is vice president of development at my company overseeing our Asia-Pacific expansion. Her penthouse was part of her executive compensation package, and it includes a clause 15.3 against forced transfer under duress. The guests murmured, shocked. I caught the collective inhale of recognition, the realization that the woman they had mocked all evening was far more than the family scapegoat. My throat tightened, but I kept my face calm. Richard shook his head violently. That's impossible. You're lying. David straightened, his expression cool as steel. The Singapore deal that netted $40 million for Hayes Capital, Samantha closed that. The Tokyo branch, which is now our most profitable office, was built by Samantha. The Samsung partnership your company begged for but never secured, Samantha negotiated it herself. Every word landed like a gavel. Carol sputtered, her voice shrill. She exaggerates. She always exaggerates. One of the lawyers slid a glossy magazine onto the table. Architectural Digest. The pages opened to a spread of my penthouse bathed in sunlight, my name printed clearly beneath the headline. Another document followed the purchase contract, bearing corporate seals and signatures, legal proof stacked between floral arrangements and empty plates. David looked at Carol directly. Extortion was demanding her property, Mrs. Hayes. This, he tapped the folder again, is a consequence. The words hit harder than any slap. The room vibrated with murmurs. 100 phones lifted higher, the red lights glowing brighter. Chloe's lip trembled. Samantha, how could you? This is supposed to be my day. Her tears dripped onto the lace of her gown, but the sound of pity was muted, now replaced by unease. Guests were no longer sure whom to sympathize with. I spoke at last, my voice calm even. I didn't do anything to you, Chloe. I simply refused to give away my home. Everything else, the announcement, the spectacle, the slap, that was not my choice. Her mouth opened and closed, no words forming. Richard tried again, his voice cracking. You can't destroy our family's reputation over this. David's reply was swift. She isn't destroying anything. You are. Public coercion, physical assault, humiliation streamed online for thousands to see. Do you understand what that does to investor confidence, Richard? One lawyer laid out another document. The shareholder agreement. The clauses highlighted in yellow glowed under the chandelier light. David's voice sharpened. I control 40% of your company. The Jensen Trust holds 15 more, and they've already called me tonight. If I convene an emergency board meeting, you will be out within 24 hours. Richard's face blanched. Carol's knuckles turned white around the microphone. She hissed, You wouldn't dare. David leaned in slightly, his expression calm but merciless. Try me. The guests held their breath. This was no longer a wedding reception. It was a courtroom, a trial carried out under crystal chandeliers and dripping roses. Every camera flash was a witness, every whisper another record. My pulse slowed, strangely steady now. I looked at the folder on the table, thick with proof legal ink, more binding than any toast or applause. I thought of the years I had spent invisible, dismissed my achievements erased at family dinners. And now here in the heart of their grand ballroom, my truth had been laid bare, undeniable. David turned slightly, his voice directed at the crowd. What you witnessed tonight was not generosity, not family pride. It was coercion. It was abuse of power dressed as love. That is why we intervene. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. Richard collapsed into his chair, face ashen. Carol stood rigid, her chest heaving, eyes darting wildly as though searching for a lifeline that would not appear. Chloe sobbed into her veil, but the sympathy she expected no longer flowed her way. I placed my hand gently on the table next to the folder of documents. The bouquet's petals brushed my fingers, delicate and fleeting. The contract's edges pressed firm against my skin. Between them lay the truth, one symbol of spectacle, one symbol of substance. The photographers kept snapping. The flashes reflected in my earrings, in the crystal flutes, in the sheen of the legal documents. Evidence immortalized. David closed the folder with a quiet finality. Samantha's property remains hers. Any further attempt to take it will result in immediate legal action. His eyes locked on Richard. You have 48 hours to issue a public apology. A real one. Or I call the board. Gasps rose again. Someone whispered bankruptcy. Someone else muttered, ruined. Carol clutched Richard's arm, her face a mask of fury and desperation. This is a wedding, she spat. You can't do this here. David's voice was calm, almost soft. You're right. This isn't the time or the place, which is why I'm giving you 48 hours to make it right. He turned away, his lawyers closing their briefcases with sharp clicks. The sound echoed through the silence like the closing of a cell door. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My eyes swept the room one last time. The faces of relatives who had laughed at me, now pale, uncertain. Business associates leaning in, whispering, calculating consequences. Guests shifting in discomfort, phones still raised, streaming every second. My voice rose one last time, calm but unyielding. The penthouse is mine, bought with my work, earned with my life. That will not change. No one argued. No one dared. The lawyers followed David out of the ballroom. The cameras pivoted toward me, flashes still burning, but I no longer cared. I lifted my clutch, steadied myself, and turned toward the doors. As they swung shut behind me, the last image I saw was Richard staring down at the closed folder. His hands trembling, his empire suddenly fragile. The first headline hit my phone before I even reached the valet. The bride's family caught extorting the sister live. I stared at the words glowing against the glass, and for a second I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because of the surreal absurdity. For 32 years my parents had controlled the narrative. Tonight the story belonged to me. Notifications stacked like falling dominoes. My phone buzzed in my hand so constantly that it felt alive, a heartbeat separate from my own. The video clip of the slap had already gone viral, circulating on Facebook, Twitter, and even LinkedIn, where industry leaders shared it with captions like, "A case study in boundaries." Every ping, every vibration was another confirmation that the silence after that slap had thundered louder than any scream. I slipped into the back of the car, the leather cold against my skin, and asked the driver to take me home. As the city lights blurred past the window, I scrolled through the flood of messages. A reporter from a financial magazine is requesting a comment. Former classmates writing, "I always knew you were stronger than they were." Colleagues forwarding screenshots of the trending hashtags, #stand with Samantha, #penthouse, not for sale. My assistant texted boss, "We're being inundated with media requests. Do you want me to handle them?" I typed back, "No comment. Not yet." By the time I stepped into my penthouse, the notifications had quadrupled. My phone lit up the dark entryway with its endless glow, each buzz like a knock at the door. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the liquid catching the city lights streaming through the windows. I curled into the corner of my sofa, set the phone on the table, and finally let myself breathe. The city below pulsed with energy car headlights weaving like veins of fire through the streets. I took a slow sip, letting the bitterness spread across my tongue. My cheek still throbbed faintly, but the wine dulled it. I thought of the earrings spinning on marble, the silence that followed, the way I had bent to pick it up without trembling. That image was everywhere now, frozen in thousands of frames. To the world, I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. The phone buzzed again, insistent. I glanced at the screen. David's name. I answered. His voice was calm, but beneath it was steel. Richard called me. He's panicking. He should be, I said. David exhaled. 3 contracts were canceled within the hour. Patterson Industries, Kim Electronics, Williams Logistics. That's 9 million annually. I closed my eyes, not with guilt but with clarity. Actions have consequences. He continued. I told him what I told the room. Treat her like a daughter, not like an ATM. And then I hung up. I could almost hear the silence on the other end of that call, the way it must have rung in my father's ears. The phone vibrated again, this time with messages from extended relatives. Some are condemning me for humiliating the family. Others quietly confessed they admired me, that they too had lived in Chloe's shadow or Carol's temper. My cousin Derek, the one who mocked me about boardrooms, texted a single line. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't reply. Some things an apology can't erase. The wine loosened my chest. I stood and walked toward the window, pressing my hand against the glass. The city stretched endlessly and was alive. Somewhere below, my family's empire was cracking. Investors pulling back. Clients are demanding explanations. Shareholders questioning leadership. The machine Richard had polished for decades grinding to a halt under the weight of one viral video. Another notification flashed. A business journalist had posted a thread. Daughter struck in public, coerced into surrendering property, saved by her own CEO. A case study in corporate governance and personal boundaries. I smirked at the irony. The very thing my parents tried to erase me with public humiliation had become my shield. Hours passed. I stayed by the window, refilling my glass once, then again. The notifications never stopped. My phone lit up with every platform I had ever used, every contact I had ever made. Some voices were supportive, others cruel, but all of them proved that the world was watching. Meanwhile, the wedding itself unraveled. A cousin posted that half the guests had left early. The groom's parents demanded a delay in signing the certificate. The flowers still bloomed, the chandeliers still glittered, but beneath it all, the story had shifted. Chloe was no longer the blushing bride. She was the sister whose happiness had been built on theft. By midnight, a final message from my assistant. The video has 3.2 million views. International outlets are picking it up. I silenced the phone and set it face down on the table. Enough. I walked back to the sofa, placed the empty wine glass beside it, and sank into the cushions. Silence. For the first time all evening, true silence. No clapping, no buzzing, no gasps. Just the hum of the city far below, and the steady rhythm of my own breath. I closed my eyes, pressing my palm against the cool fabric of the couch. My thoughts wandered back to the look on Richard's face as David placed those documents on the wedding table. Pale, almost green, like the ground had shifted beneath him. Carol's fury burned through her veneer, her knuckles white around the microphone. Chloe's sobs faltered when the applause didn't return. Every flash of the camera immortalizes not my shame but theirs. The wine left a soft warmth in my chest. I thought of the years of invisibility, the candles at family dinners, always glowing for Chloe, never for me. Tonight the light had turned, and though it came from flashes and screens, it was light nonetheless. I rose once more, walking back to the window. The glass reflected my silhouette, strong and unbroken. My cheek still bore the faint mark of Carol's hand, but even that looked different now. Not a wound, but a seal. Proof that I had stood still silent while they revealed themselves to the world. The phone buzzed again, face down on the table. I didn't pick it up this time. I let it vibrate against the wood until it went still. I turned away from it, carried my glass to the sink, and rinsed it under cool water. Enough noise for one night. As I turned off the kitchen light, the city glittered back at me, endless alive. Their empire might be crumbling, but mine stood solid, anchored in glass and steel. I walked to the bedroom, pulled back the sheets, and lay down with the hum of the city lulling me to sleep. In the morning, there would be more headlines, more fallout, more consequences. But for tonight, silence was mine. The first light of morning poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, turning the city below into rivers of gold. I stood barefoot against the glass, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and watched as the skyline shifted from shadow to brilliance. The night had been long, the noise unrelenting, yet here in the hush of dawn, everything was quiet again. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not suffocating, but full. For years I had woken in this space and still felt the echo of my family's judgments in my chest. The penthouse was my sanctuary, yes, but it had also been a fortress, a place where I hid from the sting of being overlooked. This morning it felt new. Not a fortress. A home. A line drawn clearly between the life they tried to control and the life I had built. My phone sat dark on the counter, muted since midnight. I hadn't checked the notifications yet, though I knew they would be endless. Headlines, shares, condemnations, praise, all of it swirling in a storm I no longer feared. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness remind me I was awake, alive, unbroken. A week passed, then two. The chaos outside burned hot, but inside I lived in calm. Richard issued a public apology 47 hours after David's ultimatum, stiff and clearly written by lawyers, but public nonetheless. Carol refused. She doubled down on her anger, giving interviews where she painted me as ungrateful, selfish, and corrupted by ambition. The internet tore her apart. Her words were screen captured, dissected, and mocked. Narcissist mother became a trending phrase. For once, the narrative wasn't theirs. Chloe's marriage lasted 4 months. Counseling revealed entitlement too deep, expectations too brittle. Daniel's parents had seen enough. They withdrew their support, and eventually he withdrew too. Chloe texted me once, "I hope you're happy. You ruined everything." I replied simply, "I got what I earned." There's a difference. Richard's company collapsed slowly, contracts bleeding out one after another, reputation eroded beyond repair. I heard through contacts that he had started therapy. Too late to mend what he broke with me, but perhaps not too late for himself. And me. My life expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. David called me into his office 2 weeks after the wedding disaster. "The board is impressed," he said. "Senior Vice President of Global Operations, a 40% raise. More stock. Enough to buy another penthouse if I wanted. I didn't need another. I had exactly what I wanted. Instead, I donated my bonus to a women's shelter that specialized in helping victims of domestic abuse reclaim their lives. It felt right. My pain had been public, but their battles were often fought in silence. If my fight could ripple outward, then maybe the humiliation I endured had a purpose. I filled my evenings with different kinds of commitments: guest lectures at business schools, volunteering at the shelter teaching financial literacy to women starting over. One evening, as I stood in front of a room of 15 women with notebooks open, I said the words I had needed someone to say to me years earlier: "Your piece is worth more than their approval." The room went still, and then nods, tears, murmurs of agreement. In their faces, I saw my younger self, and I promised I would keep showing up. I never returned to family dinners. I never sat again at a table where candles glowed only for Chloe. I stopped answering calls from relatives who wanted reconciliation without accountability. Blood alone did not obligate me anymore. Respect did, and respect was something they had never given. Still, there were moments when memory pulled me back. The sting of Carol's hand. The weight of Richard's booming voice comes first. The sight of Chloe glowing in borrowed light. These memories surfaced like ghosts in mirrors. But now when they came, I pressed my hand against the glass of my window and reminded myself where I stood, here, above the city I had conquered. In a home I had earned. on ground that was mine alone. One evening, I invited David and his family for dinner at my penthouse. His daughters, both in college, wandered through the rooms wide-eyed. "You're proof we don't have to shrink ourselves for anyone," one of them said. Her words landed deeper than any promotion, any contract. Proof. That was what I had needed all my life, and now I had become it for someone else. I walked them to the windows as the city lit up below. The skyline glittered alive with stories, struggles, victories. The glass felt cool under my palm as I looked out. David raised his glass and said quietly, "The best revenge is a life well lived without them." I smiled, letting the truth of it settle in me. The penthouse windows had once been a wall between me and the world. Now they were a canvas. Every sunrise painted hope across them, every sunset washed the past away. They stood as proof that I had chosen myself when no one else would. In the end, freedom didn't come with applause. It came in the quiet mornings, the evenings of laughter with chosen friends, the stillness of knowing I no longer needed their approval. My dignity wasn't something they could grant or take away. It had always been mine to hold. The city stirred below as dawn stretched across the horizon once more. I set my empty cup on the counter and stood tall before the window, the light washing over me. For years I had lived waiting for recognition, waiting for their love. But love, I learned, isn't something to beg for. It is something to protect within yourself. I whispered to the glass not as a prayer, but as a promise. Your peace is worth more than their approval. The reflection in the window showed me a woman no longer invisible. Not the daughter erased by favoritism. Not the scapegoat mocked at dinners. A woman who is whole, steady, free. As the sun rose higher, I turned from the glass, letting the light flood the room. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely at home. If you've ever had to stand between family pressure and your own self-respect, know that you're not walking that road alone. Type boundaries matter in the comments if you believe every person deserves protection from toxic family demands. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that choosing yourself is never the wrong choice. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell for more true stories about setting boundaries and building the kind of family that supports you. I want to hear from you. Are you on Samantha's side for refusing to give up her home, or do you think family approval should come first? Drop your thoughts below. And always remember, your peace is priceless.